you. Thank you for being with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So what do you guys, I'm going to hide that from you. When you think about change management, everybody has a different definition. What do you guys think of when you hear the phrase change management?
Beer fridge.
Oh, you remember my old beer fridge
I
speech,
do.
huh? Oh, yes, thank you. So what else do you think of?
Reorganization. Reorg.
Yep. So just reorg.
Yep. Or layoffs, one or the other.
Oh, interesting. Wow, boy, that's a bad connotation for change. Wow. What else do you guys think of? Communication stakeholders, okay. Any other things? Well, I think if you line up 5 project management professionals and ask them the question, you will get 5 answers, right? So I think people think about all of these things when they think about change management. Some people mean configuration management, what's going in environments, and they call that change. Some people think about organization change, which is how am I going to move the organization forward into a new reality. Some people think about, if you're studying for the PMP, you might be thinking about the Perform Integrated Change Control process as one of your 40-something processes, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think of change as just purely training and communications. They're like, why do I need a change resource on my project? It's training, it's communications, it's on my WBS, I don't care. That's what some people think of. Some people think of it as project stakeholder management. So given all of these views of change, I'm going to tell you what I think change is. Now, you can take what you like and leave the rest. These are only my opinions. But as we move forward into change and we think about organization change, I tend to think about the big C and the little c. The little c is just change enablement that happens in every project. If you're rolling out a big agile or software development life cycle or some change, you probably have to do training. You probably have to do communications. You probably have to do a few stakeholder lists and figure out who you're working with. So that's inherent to every project. So I call that the lowercase c. Now, if you are working, I worked at Bank of America for 10 years, and some of our projects were really life-changing, and some were small, incremental, new features to an existing something. So depending on what you're doing, you may not always need the capital C, right? When I think of the capital C, I think of that as really cultural change. You're really introducing something large and different in the organization, and you have to impact the culture of the organization as well as all those other elements we've been talking about. So when you really are bringing in a whole new software to a company and you've got to roll it out across the whole enterprise and you have to teach everyone to adopt it, then you might need the big C in that case, right? So that's the context of which I'm talking about C, are those big cultural change elements. Now, I've come up with this idea to myself that when I'm trying to start a big cultural change, I think of it as like starting a movement. Now, whatever you think about today's political environment with Trump, everybody knows what's on his cap, right? So you can kind of think about if you're starting a big cultural change initiative in your organization that really has large reaching impact, you might want to think about that hat and think about what would you put on that hat as your theme for your program. Think about it as starting a movement. It might be like Martin Luther King, I've got a dream. It might be, we had one at Bank of America, Shannon, years ago. Remember the one where we were doing Six Sigma and they had something like X number of defects per million and everybody walked around with a button that said that. Whatever your theme for that big, large cultural change is, think about it in that way. And as you're thinking about it in that way, there's some elements. What do people like politicians do to create a movement, to get that bottoms-up, groundswell support for their effort? Or how does anyone like Susan Komen's Race for the Cure, how did you get that movement started? How did you develop momentum? How did you make it part of the day-to-day, something large that people want to be a part of? So I'm thinking of these big cultural change efforts and saying, let's start a movement. And what do we need to do within our organization to do that? So this is really obvious. Boy, this is like telling you guys something that you don't know, right? Change requires leadership. Well, of course, you're probably saying, you think? But you know what? There is so much failure in this space in the big projects that I do across the U.S. We have a lot of leaders, but how many of them, do you know leaders who actually paint a vision of where they want to go? Do you feel like in your PMO worlds that you really have a clear idea of this group of projects and where they're trying to take you? So a lot of leaders don't know how to paint a vision, and they don't know how to underpin it with passion. I have so many leaders who, honestly, I don't think they care about what they're doing, much less motivate their people. Do you guys have that experience? People trying to survive, trying to get by? I see a lot of that where they're not really thinking about, well, if I were doing a movement, if I'm doing a race for the cure, I want to be passionate about it. I want to create some energy, some excitement. I want it to go viral. How am I going to create that energy in my organization? So leadership, I just can't stress enough. If you're out there doing your boat over the weekend this summer, you could drive all around aimlessly, or you could have a GPS coordinate and be driving to it, right? Driving around aimlessly is fun on a sunny summer afternoon, but it's not so fun when you're dragging your organization around with you and you don't really know where you're going. And I see this all the time. I'm right now in a project that I've been pulled into for 4 weeks where they've had a lot of issues at the PMO level, and I've been asked to help. So we've had a lot of midnight and 2 a.m. mornings trying to straighten out all of the PMO reporting and who's doing what. But again, it suffers from a pure lack of leadership. So I would encourage you all at whatever level you are in your organization, do not underestimate the value of leadership. People do need a direction. So next is vision. And again, so many people are just trying to deliver the scope of a project. They're not really creating a vision for their team and trying to drive them towards that vision. Do you guys see that? Do you have a vision for your project? Could you create one? If you had a little tagline for your project, could you come up with one? Would that help you drive it? Would that help you communicate? And again, if you're doing really small incremental changes, which is clearly a project and is clearly still work, but if you're just doing a small incremental change, this may be harder. But if you've been charged with coming in and creating a whole new enterprise time tracking tool, you might really need a slogan, don't you think? So create that vision for your team. Really make it clear to them where you're going. It's not just about that very detailed WBS and here's the scope. And what do you mean, Pam? Well, I define the scope. But make it a little more clear to them, what's the vision for the firm? Where are you trying to take you? What is this project going to do? And how are you driving towards those benefits? So paint that picture for people. And again, this all seems obvious, but I don't see people do this a lot. Do you? All right. All right, so here's a quote from Emerson that I love. Nothing great was ever accomplished without passion. I have so many leaders on PMO meetings that sound like this the whole time they're meeting. What's your status today? So-and-so, did you put your phone on mute? I can hear your dog barking. Do you sit through hours of projects like that? Don't you sometimes just want to shake them and go, if you don't care about what we're talking about, nobody else does either. Do you guys suffer from that? I would say that so many people are just getting by. They're doing the mechanics of project management, but they're not really bringing any passion or energy to it. And I think we suffer from a failure of leadership and passion. And again, these are all touchy-feely skills. These aren't block and tackle. Here's my 10 knowledge areas and my 5 groups and my 47 processes and my inputs and my outputs. But these are the things that I've seen wreck projects. And if you've been to my beer fridge speech, you know how, these are the things that truly do wreck projects. We just aren't clear about where we're going, and we don't have any passion. I see this all the time. I'm a little more lively than most people in banking, and I always joke and say that I have to keep about 80% of my personality on hold at any given moment. So, but still, even at 20%, I've got more passion than some people at 100. So I think we need to work on that. So a goal. Obviously, this is easy, right? We have a goal. Where are we going? Can you really define some clear goals for your project? Or are you lost in the details of the WBS? You've got 2,000 lines. I mean, I've had deployment events over weekends where we've had 4,000 lines for the weekend. So what do you mean, what's our goal? Put this thing in, Pam. Well, geez, this is stupid. What are you talking about? But do you have an overarching goal? Do you know what the benefits are of your project? Do you know what value you're trying to create for the firm? At the end of your project, how is the firm a better place? What's your end state goal that you're trying to bring people towards? So something to think about. Is there a simple way to define back to your slogan and starting a movement? Where are you leading everyone towards? Okay, so here's the thing with messaging. Now, I don't have slides on this, but at some point in the call today, this talk today, I want to talk about some of the new workforce of the future and some of the trends we're seeing across our practice at Accenture and some of the new ways to do messaging. So again, the core of what I want to say on this slide for messaging is, if you're starting a movement, what do you got to do? You got to create the vision, and then you got to start doing some communications or messaging around it, right? How many of you in your projects, do you guys use instant message within your firm?
Yeah.
Of course, let me just right. Do you guys have extra social media channels that you use on your projects? At Accenture, we have a lot of behind-the-scenes social media. Sometimes I want to say there's only so many channels I can look at one time, but there's a lot of firms are starting to use a lot of different messaging techniques to reach their employees. So I'm going to talk, because Father's Day is Sunday. Now, this is not on the slide, but I'm going to quiz you before we leave, okay? So I have an acronym for you. No slide. DAD. Okay? DAD, it's Father's Day, right? So I'm going to talk about 3 things real quick that are kind of out of context in the middle of this. The first D is digital. Now, everybody's like, what is this whole digital? Accenture has a whole practice now. If you're at the airport and you see our 5 lines of business, one is digital. They're like, digital and technology, what's the difference, right? But let's hold the thought of digital, okay? And then let's talk about artificial intelligence. Some people call it enhanced reality. Let's talk about that theme with an A. And then let's come back to our last D, which is data. And those 3 all kind of work together like the word dad. So in some of the messaging now, a lot of people are going to, have you guys seen, everyone's seen the old QRC things that you scan with your phone, right? Have you seen some of the new enhanced communications where I'm going to a seminar like today? I don't really necessarily want to carry this book around. Maybe on the front page I have a picture. Maybe it's the PMI logo. I might have you scan that logo with your phone and with a special app, not with the QRC app, but just with an app. And then that might all of a sudden bring up real-time information for me. Hey, the next hour, here's your 4 choices. So a lot of people are now going to just-in-time messaging. There might be a poster in the break room, and you want to impart a message to your employees, or maybe it's your slogan about your project, right? Your theme, your movement. I want people to know about it. So I'm going to put a poster in the break room, but I might make an app available where they can go scan that poster, and it might be a short video on their phone of Pierre, who's the head of Accenture, giving us a talk about our new practices and how we're rolling it out. So a lot of change enablement lately, or this cultural change, is using a lot of new messaging formats. There's a lot of these kind of apps that are going to become more widespread. And there's a big gap, when we go back to our DAD acronym, there's a big gap between what you do in your personal life on your phone and the tools you have at work, right? So on your phone, boy, you've got it customized, right? You got your apps. How many of us are lost without your phone for even 3 or 4 hours? I travel every week. So, on my phone, I have my Audible books if I feel like listening. I have my Kindle books if I want to read. I have my Solitaire app. When people on the plane are driving me crazy, I put in the earplugs and play game, right? I have my banking apps. I have my little world organized, right? Do you have those same kind of ready, easily to use tools in the workplace? So there's a lot of transformation going on. This whole idea of artificial intelligence or enhanced reality on the personal front. How many of you buy stuff from Amazon? How many of you like to read Kindle books like me? I'm a bit of a junkie. Boy, does Amazon know me or what? Do they not send me, based on your past selections, you might like these 3 books. Or, oh, Pamela, you're one of your favorite authors. Hey, I can tell because you've downloaded 10 of her books in the last 3 years, right? One of your favorite authors has a new release. Did you know that? So see, that's enhanced intelligence. They have data, and that's back to my D and DAD for data. They have big data. They have the tools to analyze it. They personalized it for me, and they're saying, Pamela, do I have a deal for you? Last week, I noticed that you went to, how about Groupon? Last week, you pulled up a picture on a canvas. Hey, you might want to know that's an extra discount this week. You didn't buy one, but you might want to now. So all of this big data and this personalization and messaging, it's all about me, right? But there's all of this artificial intelligence out there, these systems, these analytic capabilities that are creating all of this data, and they're making it personal to me. And a lot of our customers, from an Accenture perspective, my financial services clients are going to see this a lot more. Branch banking might change significantly. People don't want to go do transactional stuff. They can do that anywhere. I don't want to go on a branch to do transactions. And a lot of the investments that people make, a lot of the old stock analyst people, big data is done a lot better by a computer than it is by a person. A person's never going to know me as well as Amazon who looks at my spending trends. So this whole transformation around big data, around artificial enhanced knowledge about you to drive real-time decisions, and that whole digital, how everything's in a digital consumable format, we really all see that on the personal side, right? But how many of you see that in your firms? Some, but do you see it anything like the sophistication level? So a lot of our work at Accenture in the change field is helping our clients, even on something like communications and messaging. How do we help them grab hold of some of the channels that your people are using? If I want you to know about a new HR thing, maybe I can push it to your phone, give you that real-time code to pull up real-time data when you want it. Maybe I'm not just going to send you an email. Change is coming. Read this email. I might want to try some of these new techniques to get my message to become viral, to get that buy-in from the bottom up, to change the culture if I have a culture-changing project, right? So these are some of the trends I think you guys will see. And there's a lot of talk about the workforce of the future and digital disruption, and this being a little bit more like the turn of the century when we went to more industrial, when cars took over from horses. We're going to see a lot of jobs shift, a lot of the transactional jobs that are just about information. We're already doing some work with some banks on transactional data that's enhanced through robotics, that there's a lot of artificial intelligence mechanisms. We're starting to help banks create some of that advisory kind of stuff that's pure data driven.
But one of the problems for a project manager would be having to include that with costs. Because so much are being, it's one thing for the companies who are able to justify it by seeing additional sales. What would you say, how would a project manager be able to justify spending the additional time and cost for creating that message and getting it deployed?
And that is a challenge always, that risk-reward trade-off, that cost-benefit. But I think you'll start to see more projects in your firms that are going to bring some of these capabilities. But again, if you have a really large project rolling out a major enterprise tool that's going to really change how your people work and interact, you might consider these kinds of things. If you have a small everyday project that's some new feature to a piece of something, you probably would never justify the money. But if you're, like I'm working on a $40 million project right now where they're doing a huge Oracle upgrade and changing out their whole system, and it impacts their whole organization. So in a case like that, you might be looking for new ways because it's hard to get your people engaged. People, about the 15th email when you've given me a deadline. At Accenture, it's been on the street pretty noisy that Accenture used to have laddering calls when it was performance management time. I'm going to stack rank everybody. Well, they're trying to get away from that. We have a new performance management tool. And we have gotten so many emails, it's enough to, yeah, another performance management email, huh? You know, so you get all of this information about these huge enterprise tools that you have to use. And most of us just go out and have time for that right now. I've got project work to do. I'm busy. And you just, so other than email, what are some of the ways to get people's attention? So again, you might start seeing some of these new technologies like that ability to scan a poster and get real-time information, or that ability to have different channels. You might get a push to your phone. There might be an app that you can look for updates on. Everything won't necessarily be so email driven in 10 or 15 years, or even maybe in 5. So just something to think about. But as you are doing your messaging, if you're trying to do that bottoms up, large cultural change for a major initiative, you might want to look into some of these new messaging techniques other than just the tired old, I sent them an email, I had a training class, you know, I did those things to prep them. They have new processes and procedures written up and in their standard call center procedures. You know, I've done all these things. Okay, I communicated. What do you mean they don't know about this thing? We communicated. Look at my communication plan. But so this is more about how do you create a movement? How do you get that go viral energy and excitement around what you're doing? So belabored that point. So here is, boy, have I lived in this world, right? So I have to tell you guys a story that's a little bit embarrassing on me, right? One day I was doing this extremely executive summary of some project financials. And this project had funding from like 5 sources. I had a workbook that had like 15 tabs. I had it ticked and tied on the next account. You know, I knew my numbers. Well, we had this little pesky problem of $1 million variance, but hey, it was a $40 million project, so it was plus or minus 5%, right? So we had to go in front of this leadership and explain why we were over $1 million on this project. So I had this big workbook like that, summarized to here, summarized to here, summarized to here. So I had this slide that had just a couple key numbers, and we were presenting it. Well, this one woman who was a business director for one of the execs kept asking me questions. So Pamela, what about this? So Pamela, what about that? What about this? So finally, she seemed satisfied. We got our change control approved, our budget was increased, and I walked back to my desk. Well, then I had this idea. It wasn't one of my better ideas. I thought, maybe she would like to see my workbook. Are you guys cringing with me? This was about, I'm happy to say this was about 5 years ago, but I've learned better. Maybe she would like to see my workbook. So I sent her my workbook. So then I got an email from her. Rather than brushing me off and thinking, what the heck? She actually wrote me an email back. Do you want to know what she said? Exactly what do you want me to do with this information? Oh, wow. So, you know, I was embarrassed and I wanted to crawl under my desk and I was like, oh my God. But then a few minutes later, I kind of had to laugh. What did I want her to do with that information? Know that I had it? That was kind of a CYA kind of thing, right? A cover my rear end kind of thing. That came from an insecure place, right? So sometimes we have all of this stuff and our teams are looking at all of this stuff and they can't see the signal for the noise, right? So how are you with messaging and with a proper call to action, helping them really see the critical few things that you want them to do? And this happens every day. This project I've been called upon to help with, it's like we took an old-fashioned phone book and thumped it in front of the client. Here you go. And they're looking at that and going, you didn't tell them there's this instrument called a phone and you dial those numbers and that's how you get something to happen, right? They're looking at that thing going, exactly what do you want me to do with this? Because in that case with the big analytics, that A and DAD, I read something on LinkedIn yesterday, and I don't have these stats exactly right, but I thought this was just the idea of it. Again, these aren't the right stats. That I thought was highly interesting. They said, imagine the rate of big data. Imagine that when you were a kid, and you're my age, when you were a kid, your parents might have taken 100 pictures a year. Imagine that if in a year they suddenly took 500 pictures, and imagine by today, the growth of big data in the last 10 years would be equivalent to them taking 200,000 pictures a year of me now, which would be a couple every second. that's the rate that big data has been growing in the last 20 years. And they said that sometimes as we're analyzing this big data, that there's a bias that they're calling recency, because we have so much data for the last 20 years and not much for the previous 2000, that we're biased to more look at trends from this immediate time of the last 10 years and not so much history. So I thought that was interesting, but as big data's out there, it's only as good as the interpretations you can put on it, right? Amazon, knowing my transactional spends history, is like a phone book thumped down. Doesn't really mean anything, so what do they do with that? How do they make that meaningful to me? They mine it, and then what?
Figure out your behaviors.
Figure out my behaviors, target a message to me. They kind of, I like to think of it as they focus in on my vulnerabilities and my bad habits, right? Oh, she likes that author. Do I have a book for you right here? And hey, it's on sale. Click right here. They make it easy to do business with them, right? I can click through, my card's saved. In one click, I can have a book. They can be about to close the airplane gate, and I can download a book, download the Audible, have the earplugs in, and I'm listening in 1 minute, right? So again, data by itself is meaningless. Going and mining having all this data is like that big phone book without knowing that the phone is used to dial the numbers, right? So, but again, all this information on your project, do you help your team know what to do with this information? Or do you just chunk them the 3,000 line Microsoft Project Work Plan in WBS and hope that they're focused on the right things? So again, if you're, have you had that experience?
No, it's just, I'm going studying, you know.
Can you tell I've been caught on a few of these myself? But it's so easy to get lost in the details. It really is. The details are important. We have to have them. But how do we, in terms of starting that movement, that cultural change, that buy-in, how do we message things and provide the right level of information? And then, of course, we have to have commitment, right? How many executives whiffle waffle on the programs? Do you guys see that? Sometimes there's valid business reasons for change, right? Sometimes there's a different driver of the organization changed their mind. But sometimes I see people that aren't really committed. Now, I don't want to sound like an advertisement for Accenture. I'm not trying to, but so many people think of change management as being an airy-fairy, fluffy science. Accenture actually has a tool with 20 years of analytics where we go out and group your project teams into maybe different groups, like this is the operations group and the tech group and this, and we measure their commitment to the project. We ask them targeted questions, and we compare it to benchmarks, and we say, you know what? You want to get your team from here to here, but we found that your team, and there's like, 20 different kinds of things on this mountain, like the Valley of Despair, and, there's lots of different names, but you want your team to be all the way up here as a high-performing team. But you know what? Right now, when we ask them about things, they're all the way down here. So if you're going to get them from here to here, what are you going to do to change their behaviors? So sometimes commitment and getting commitment, you can create some sort of an analytical tool to measure where the team is now, not where you think they are, not where you think they ought to be, but actually ask them questions and see what they really do know about what you're doing. You might be surprised. So we have a tool that we offer called change tracking, which is an actual, most people don't think of analytical tools aligned with change management, but we do attempt to track their level of commitment to see if we need them to be here and they're here, how do I move them along that change curve? And how do I even more target my message so that they can understand what we're doing, because there's a gap here, right? So you can actually provide analytics and measurements for commitment. And so we do a lot of that. When we have people come in on a big cultural change and organization change project, we're actually trying to measure where they are on the commitment curve and how do we move them to a higher level of commitment or knowledge about the project. And once we've done that, we create change agents, right? Have you deputized a few people? You don't even know what I mean, right? So if you're in the break room and you're making coffee and you're on this project and somebody says, what are you working on? And you say,
Transitioning to board over IP funds.
and I say, what is that? So you might need some change agents. If it's a big project and you want people to be really involved, you might want in the break room, tell me all about it. And now Pamela can go tell people, oh, I talked to Deborah and Deborah's doing this great project. So you want to be sure that from the bottom up at all levels in the organization, you have people who are talking good about your project. How many times have you had break room conversations where the word on the street is that your project has an awful reputation and everybody's witching and moaning everything? So you need a change agent in the cafeteria when you hear two people talking. Well, that project that Pamela's working on, that Oracle conversion, that thing is a train wreck. So, I need to be able to have somebody, Shannon's my good friend, and maybe Shannon goes, well, I heard Pamela say that actually this project is going to turn around because they're doing X, Y, Z, and I think it's going to be a great opportunity. So I need to go find my change agents in the organization. I need to give them a little deputized badge, and I need to make sure that they're helping me. Because if you want a message to go viral, can you do that by yourself? I mean, no matter what you think about politics, people like Bernie Sanders has gotten a lot of people to listen to him, right? He didn't do that by himself, right? He's kind of had a bottoms up, a lot of people out there talking his message. He deputized a lot of change agents, right? So we have to, in our projects, again, if we're doing those large cultural projects, we have to really think about who in the organization is on our side and who's going to help us, and how are we going to get the word out there, the reputation of this project to be something exciting as opposed to something terrible. Or if we were in trouble and it has a bad reputation, how do we start to turn the conversation around and get people on our side so that we can manage it? So again, that's a little hokey, but it's an important concept. And then your lens of reality. I love this Thoreau quote. It's not what you look at that matters, but what you see. Have you ever had 2 or 3 people on your project and they feel very differently about it? Some of that is human nature, right? Some people are always going to see the glass half full or half empty. But so many people, what you talk about and what you focus on, we spend so much time focusing on the problems and so much time driving our teams hard on fixing something that we don't always focus on solutions, or we don't always help them see the benefit of the work they're doing. So I think it's important that you look at your own as project leaders. What is your lens of reality? Now, you can try to put a nice face on something, but communication happens on an unconscious level. If I have a fake smile, you will at some level notice that. You won't know how you notice it. You may not consciously notice it. But your unconscious mind is ticking off 15 things about my body language that are telling you something about me. So you can try to put a good face on it for your team, but if your lens of reality is negative, your team's going to react to that. So it is an inside job, and you're going to have to work on your own attitude if you're going to be an effective leader. And I've been on projects that have been depressing, I'll be honest, where the team's working long hours, where it just seems like the benefits are so far away and people are tired and it's crunch time and you're trying to motivate people, but you're not motivated yourself. People will see that. I don't care how well you try to put an actor face on it. So working on ourselves and our attitude and the lens that we're looking at reality through and focusing on solutions will make us better leaders. And this is a leadership topic. And then last but not least, if you really want change, if you've really built a new enterprise tool and you really want it to be adopted and embraced, it's got to become part of the DNA of the organization. It's got to be that groundswell movement where people just think about it and talk about it. And it's not, I sent you one communication and email 2 weeks ago. What do you mean you don't know about us? There's got to be, how do you learn behaviors as a kid? Do any of you have kids under 5? Any of you ever had kids under 5? Yeah. So how did they learn your beliefs? How did they learn your religious values, any values?
Repetition.
Constant repetition, right? There was that time that my daughter was going to a Christian preschool, and the day before I dropped the eggs on the floor from the grocery store and said a 4-letter expletive. So the next day at preschool, she dropped it and said that same expletive with the same sense of urgency, right? I mean, constant, you're immersed in those behaviors, right? If you've ever known anyone in the 12-step program, have you ever heard their slogan, 90 meetings in 90 days? Why do you think they push that? Repetition, right? So again, if you've done a good job of creating this cultural change for your organization, and you've done that groundswell movement from the bottom up, and you've had focus and vision and leadership and change agents deputized, it'll become part of the DNA of the organization. It'll become how we do business. But how many of you have ever built something and they didn't come? Have you guys had that experience? Because I have. Where you rolled out a project and went to great extremes to build something for the organization and nobody ever adopted it? I'm the only one who had that. And there was one study that I read a few years ago that after 4 or 5 years, there's X number of projects, and it was it was over 50%. I don't remember the exact number, that within 3 years are doing business the way they were before. So, if we want it to become, I use the phrase, if we want our change to be sticky, then it needs to become part of the DNA of the organization through constant repetition, through all the things we've just talked about. So to create a movement, these are the things that we need to do, and we need to help it be sustainable. So in some of the time we have left, some people like a model. They feel like, okay, that was fluffy, Pamela. Geez, that was some fluffy things. Yeah, leadership, vision. Yeah, we all know that. Here's a model for you on change across the process groups. You need people that are going to sponsor the change, manage and measure the change, because again, you can measure commitment, design the new organization, resources aligned to the new cultural change, and support the change. And within that, here's some of the, I think you guys will have access to this, but here's some of the things that you might do at each of those pillars. So this is more of a model of how you might pull together a true organization change project as opposed to just building something. So again, we've talked through a lot of these concepts without using these words. So I want you guys, I know we're not in tables today, but I thought we could have a little bit of conversation with the time we have left. Let's talk a little bit about yourself as a leader in the lens of your reality. Do some of you sometimes struggle with feeling the proper motivation for your projects? Do you feel a little bit beaten down by your organization and have a hard time? You're shaking your head. Tell us just a tad about it. Are you ready?
Yeah. So in my organization, we lose a lot of focus, and so leadership kind of moves on to something else, and so we have a hard time getting the project finished because they're kind of already moved on to the next thing. So that gets frustrating. You just feel like you can't complete the project because it's just lost focus.
And so what are some of the things that you think maybe you as a leader, when you're frustrated, it shows, right? This week, helping with this PMO, I just got dumped on this project the last 2 weeks. I mean, we've been up till midnight 3 nights. We had a 4 a.m. Wednesday night, a midnight Thursday, and a 2 a.m. last night. And, after 2 weeks of that, I'm sure I'm not looking like a poster child for all these concepts, because I'm thinking, God, this is ridiculous. This is crazy. I can't sustain this. What the heck, right? So somehow my work has to be within myself before I show up again in Philadelphia on Monday morning. I've got to sit myself down and think about myself as a leader. If you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, what's the message to the team? What's the message to the client? Are you exuding the right level of confidence? And if you're not feeling it, what are you going to do to shore yourself up? Because it starts here, right? So this is where leadership is not about the models and the charts. It's about us as people, right? And this is obvious stuff, but honestly, we don't realize how much our attitude impacts our team. And sometimes when we're tired, it's hard for us to have the right attitude. So what do you think about, if you're thinking about how others perceive you, and you're thinking about your perception as a leader, what are you guys thinking about that? Do you think that in your organization, are you allowed to be a leader?
I think you're a leader no matter what.
There you go.
If you're in any role you're in, you're a leader.
If you choose to be, right?
That's correct. And as long as you think that way, you are that way. Leader is not a title or a position. The leader is who you are. Leader is, every time I learn something, I say, okay, maybe I can help somebody else learn something, or vice versa. That's my belief. I believe, wholeheartedly in that.
So she was a plant. I had her say that was the absolute right answer. Again, these are some of the things we all struggle with, keeping ourselves motivated, keeping the teams motivated. So if you guys out in the world of project management, if you were asked to do a big cultural change project, Or for all of you, change is coming, right? There's going to be a lot of new data, new messaging kinds of things you can use, a lot of new apps like on phones that might become more prevalent in the workplace. You know, we're supposed to be available 24/7 and people are after us all the time. You know, what are some of your biggest challenges with your projects in leadership? What are some of the things you most struggle with? Anyone want to share a story? Anybody? What's somebody struggling with? Anything? Yes?
So I work at Family Dollar. You might have heard that Dollar Tree bought us. So we're in the process of trying to merge, together. So that's really a challenge because our cultures are very different, and there's a lot of work to do. And at first there's not a lot of trust. So the biggest thing is really building trust, building those relationships so that you trust each other and you can work together, and being flexible. So understanding that you do it this way and they do it that way, and that's okay. It doesn't mean either way is wrong, but what's going to work best for you to do it together and be open to thinking about doing it differently. And that's really a huge challenge. If people are not open to that change, to that flexibility, to, okay, I know I've done it this way for 10 years, but we're going to do it a little different, and that's, it's not the end of the world.
And do you feel like leadership has the right focus on, are they trying to start a movement on what your new identity is and drive people and give that slogan and button? And do you think some of these concepts would help in your case to merge the cultures?
It would definitely help. I mean, we've had a challenge at Family Dollar where we don't have different leaders on the same page, or it's almost like different cultures within our company that we're trying to merge with other companies. So, everybody has their own motives and what they're trying to do. So that's a challenge, and just the way the organization thinks. So they think like, how people maybe felt 10 years ago. They don't have that kind of visionary. It's like you were saying, it's flawed. That's flawed. Framework maybe is flawed, and we just get it done. And so it's
people have that perception. I don't personally think it's flawed, but a lot of people have
but
that
I mean, they might think something we say is overly complicated, and we might think, they're not thinking of the big picture. And so that's a really big challenge and communication. There's a big lack of communication. We probably have communications. So it's always this, what's going on? Do you know what's going on? So, those things would really help if you just let people know what's going on. They're more comfortable. They're not worried. They're not reading into it and turning into something that's not like that. Like there's going to be a layoff about here. It's going to be a layoff next month. It's like Princess Bride. Almost like it's
Yeah, and people struggle with that. I mean, I worked for small business until I was almost 40. When I went to work for Bank of America, my husband has been a long time Duke Energy employee, and he sat me down one day and he said, Pam, I'm going to give you some advice about going to work for Bank of America. People are going to downsize, resize, outsource, lay off every other minute. If you get caught up in those conversations by the water cooler, you will be forever in churn, but you need to focus on the work to be done. So I think that leadership could do a lot more if they thought of this merger as a movement. They could do a lot more to create a direction and a vision and help people out. But we can do our part by trying not to get too into the panic mode. How many of you have done large merger and acquisition projects and seen this clashing culture? Many of us in here have, I'm sure. So I mean, my years at Bank of America were all during the merger, so every project, over the 8 years I was there, the fleet merger, we bought some banks, the MBNA merger, we bought a credit card company, and in each case you had this collision, Merrill Lynch and Bank of America trying to combine. All of those projects have that similar feel where you have that colliding cultures, and somehow you have to create a new identity, and I think sometimes that's where organizations change. If we're using change management in that way, that's where these tools could really help on those kinds of cultural changes, as opposed to your everyday block and tackle software development lifecycle feature functionality kind of project. So anything else you guys have in the way of challenges that you're seeing around change in your organization? Anybody else have a story?
We've done a couple of agile transformations, and that's hard for people to change in their mentality. It's just more like a PMO, but it's huge. And people either say, I want to do it or I don't. It's pretty easy to tell, but a lot of people don't want to.
And a lot of it comes from people just don't like to change. I mean, that's just the bottom line. So we have to make it somehow interesting or somehow give them some motivation to want to change. And I think we spend so much time, well, they're getting paid, it's a project, here's the work to do, sit down, shut up and do this thing. And we don't spend enough time dealing with the human element. And that's why I see a lot of projects fail. And back to my beer fridge story, which was we bought a software company in Texas, and we thought that we had incented people to remain, and they were some of the only people that knew that software. And I got a call on a Friday afternoon that 3 of our key people who were single points of failure for parts of the applications that had been no knowledge share, they walked out on Friday because they had a beer fridge in their break room. And it wasn't a little tiny under the desk beer fridge. It was 3 floor to ceiling, stainless steel, 60 microbrewery brands beer fridge. And they had a culture where every afternoon at 5, they got a beer, they walked around to each other's desks, they put their feet up, they talked about their issues. And when we took the beer fridge out, that was like the death of their culture. And so people that we thought that we had incented to stay were kind of like, no, don't care. And that actually set a merger project back 3 months on the timeline because they were single points of failure. We had to have people come in and reverse engineer the apps. There was no knowledge transfer at all. So again, these are the things that wreck projects. So I hope you guys, in closing today, I hope you can just, if you get nothing else from today, remember some of the new disruptors that are coming and think of that DAG and what you're doing to think about big data and about analytics and about digital, how you're going to use some of those in your projects. And maybe think about if your project had a button or a slogan on your hat, what would it be? And how can you drive people with a little more vision and passion? So thank you. Appreciate your time today.